Warning, this content may be upsetting or disturbing to some audiences. In the spirit of Halloween, paranormal or not, what is the scariest, creepiest or most unsettling experience of your life? Growing up, my bedroom was the only one that faced the front of the house/street. When I was about 8 or 9, I woke up to my dad calmly but firmly telling me to get up, go in the bathroom, and shut the door. I was annoyed because I was half asleep, but I listened. The next morning I asked my mom what happened. She seemed oblivious and confused. I looked at my dad like she was crazy, and I asked him why he had woken me up. He denied doing it. I was becoming frustrated to the point of tears, but I ultimately let it go. Fast forward to college. I was home one break, and I decided to ask again. I had thought of that night off and on for years, and it still bothered me. Someone had broken into the garage and was inside the house. My room was partially over the garage. My dad heard it happen and quietly got me to safety. Police were called, the guy ran. It wasn't supernatural, but it was unsettling for sure. When I was a kid, I woke up in the middle of the night to my bed shaking. Normally that would scare the crap out of me, but instead I was just kind of annoyed. I rolled over and muttered, "Stop it." The shaking stopped immediately. Then a male voice speaks right beside me, saying, "Sorry." That's when I freaked out. I'm pretty sure my childhood house was haunted. When I was 16 in the mid-90s, aka the I know everything, I'm invincible and you can't stop me age, I got in a fight with an acquaintance while a whole bunch of us were hanging out at his house. Stupid fight, can't remember what about, but I decided FCK it. I was going home. I was going to walk home, in the middle of the night, though not as safe as it seemed neighborhood, as a tiny 16-year-old girl, so I did. I think, in hindsight, my friends either didn't believe I was going to do it, or were too startled by the sudden argument to realize what I was doing. I left the house and started hoofing it. About a mile out, the suburban housing neighborhood melted into a main street, with highway access. It would follow me, pass me, turn a corner, and about 3 blocks later, it would do the same thing. I mean, really obvious what it was doing. I crossed over to the other side of the street so I was walking the opposite of traffic flow, and thus no car could come up behind me. About a mile later, there was a 24-hour Fred Meyer, West Coast USA chain grocery/all-purpose store, lights bright, but parking lot empty-ish. I immediately crossed the parking lot and went to head inside. Just before I got to the doors, the minivan that had been following me, pulled up into one of the parking spots. A guy called out from the driver's side and said, "I don't want you to walk over here, just stay there and listen. I just wanted to let you know what I was doing. I saw you walking a while back, but I also saw a dark car that was following you. A couple of times you went to turn around, or stopped, so it started following you down a parallel side street. Go inside the store, and call someone to come pick you up, please. I haven't seen the car since you headed across the lot." He waited until I was inside the store, and then pulled away. I didn't have anyone to call, so I just let the night cashier know what was going on, and hung out with her for about an hour and a half. Then I finished the walk home. I've never forgotten the incident, or that man, whoever he was. Not to me, but to my sister. Her husband and her had just had their first child a few months prior. My brother-in-law was working the graveyard shift at his job as my sister stayed home taking care of my nephew. Around 2 a.m., she heard loud knocking on her back door. The lady told my sister that her husband had just beat her down the street and was looking for her. My sister was hesitant to let her in since she had a newborn in the house and didn't want to interfere. She told the lady that the best she could do was call the police for her. This is where my sister got suspicious. She went to get her phone and called 911. When she went back to the door, the lady was gone. The police arrived a few minutes later and they told my sister that the same situation happened a few streets down. I'm sure this is very common, but having it almost happen to my sister and my nephew just creeps me out. Some real Clockwork Orange shit. I was home alone once when my parents were out of town. We had just moved into our house, so there was an empty lot next to our house, with the house half built. My parents were the types to leave the outdoor side garage door unlocked. Dumbasses, I know. I put my TV on mute and I listen again. I see it actually move that time. I start freaking out and I'm kind of in shock looking for the phone. Can't find the house phone, so I search for my cell. Remembered I left my charger in my parents' car, so I'm frantically looking for the house phone. Well, Whoever was wiggling my garage door knob starts banging on the windows in my living room. Again, no blinds or phone, and at that moment I realize this guy is seeing my every move, so I shoot upstairs. He then starts pounding on my front door. I can tell at that point, he's using something metal or plastic by the sound of the thumps. I really thought he was going to shoot my door open. I wanted so badly to push the button that detects where my house phone is, but I thought if he heard where it was, he'd break the window nearest to it and take it. I then remembered I left the phone in my mom's room, and as I pass the hallway to her room I see two people pacing in front of my house. I'm freaking out trying to find my dad's gun in my parents' bedroom. I find the phone and call 911. As I'm on the phone, the window breaks. Suddenly everything goes silent. I'm waiting in my parents' pitch-black closet for what seems like an eternity, then I hear the sirens. Cops show up but there is no one to be found. I figured that they hadn't gone too far since it had just occurred. Cops never found my tormentors. On a way to a camping trip, I passed by an old, painted-up car with decorations of Muppets and stuff on it. Obviously owned by a crazy person who couldn't drive over 50 miles per hour. Without stopping, we passed the same car 40 minutes later. One night, about 10 months ago, there was a pretty heavy snowstorm in my area. All of the roads were closed and a curfew was issued for everybody except emergency medical personnel. I had been shoveling snow for most of the day and was dead tired come nightfall. Didn't have the energy to do much of anything besides eat dinner and lay down. I fire up some OG Star Trek and begin to doze off. A couple of hours later, around 1 a.m., I hear the sound of a door rattling and a slight whisper saying my name, Vladimir_Ponin. I sit up a bit and realize it's coming from my parents' room, becoming fainter with the passing time. Shitty folding knife in hand, I peek out into the hallway and don't see anything. The noise is still coming from the room next door, the rattling becoming more rushed as I approach. Cautiously, I open the door and sneak inside. It's pitch black and I can't see anything. My eyes are taking entirely too long to adjust to the darkness. I'm shuffling forward, and all of a sudden, something grabs and pulls on my leg. At this point I was so freaked out I jumped back. As the whispers continued, I recognized my dad's voice. He was asking me for help. He had a stroke while walking to use the bathroom around 1 a.m. that night. After he fell, he was able to use his left foot to rattle the door to his bathroom. My mom fell asleep on the couch in the living room and wasn't around to help or hear. That was the scariest night of my life. The doctors told us there wasn't much hope for my dad before going into surgery, since he had a hemorrhagic stroke and there was a massive amount of bleeding. Fast forward 10 months and my old man is cognitively the same, just paralyzed on his right side. He had every infection under the sun while in the hospital, but he staved them off and is still with us today. He was my best friend before the incident, and my hero after. I've had multiple times when I've woken up in the middle of the night and was sure I could see a figure in my room until I turned on my bedside light. Usually this scares me a bit, but my most memorable one was waking up thinking I saw some short figure at the end of my bloody bed and saying "fuck off, I'm trying to sleep," then returning to burying my face into the comfort of my pillow. Seems like it worked. On my previous job when our building was still under construction, the only floors that were occupied were the 1st, 2nd, 5th, 6th and 7th. One time I was alone inside the elevator going from 1st to the 6th floor when suddenly it stopped and opened on the 3rd floor, so I pressed the closed button as fast as I could. When it closed I heard noises like someone was tapping their fingers on the walls of elevator. Walking towards a pack of howling wild dogs on the other side of a bush line, going to get rid of them to protect cattle. Several hundred meters away they got our scent on the wind. Those howls turned to growls and snarls. 10-year-old me booked it back home. That moment you realize they know you and where you were was creepy. When I was around 16 my rapidly growing family finally moved from the house I had spent my entire life in. As you would expect, we spent a lot of time fondly remembering things we used to do in the house as we were packing everything up. Now, this is one of those deep closets that goes under the stairs. It went back around 8 feet and then had a left turn into a very low, maybe 3-foot high space. This space was largely occupied by a mountain of old blankets and stuffed animals. Of course, this is the most fluffy spot to sit and read. About an hour and I shift a little to get comfortable and I hear a low, slow, warped, hoarse voice say, "You always make me happy." I flipped my shit, hit my head on the low ceiling, and practically broke the door down getting out. It was my stuffed little bear from when I was 3 or 4 years old that I happened to lean on just right to press his belly. When I pressed his stomach again, oh, nothing. You make me happy too, little bear, when you're not making me piss myself. Back when my grandfather died, his children and some of the grandchildren took turns in staying over at Grandma's house. The house was on a pretty big plot of land with a nice big barn, and while Grandma loved her gardening, Grandpa used to take care of the lawn. One day he had felt a bit wheezy while mowing the lawn, so he went inside and eventually ended up calling the doctor and going to the hospital. As one of the older grandkids, I stayed over one night as well. Bluntly speaking, I was a bit on edge with just having a dead body in the house, but nothing really eventful happened that night. Said goodnight to my grandfather, felt weird, and went upstairs to rest. The next morning my grandmother was already preparing dinner for all the people that would be coming by to pay their respects. She, quite sternly, told me she wanted to do this particular thing alone, so I decided to start the day by mowing the stretch of lawn my grandfather never got to finish. It wasn't a small patch of grass, but I figured the electric push mower should be more than enough. I hooked it up using a long, orange extension cord and got to work. Now, you have to know, my grandfather was a skilled, but super safe, handyman. He was an electrical engineer by trade and always working on the house or tinkering in the barn, doing the bigger gardening projects my grandmother couldn't do, making us toys or fixing our bikes, etc. When I was mowing the lawn, I was thinking about all of that instead of actually minding the extension cord. I effed up. I ran over a coil of it, slightly damaging the cable down to the copper, but not cutting it in half completely. The safest way to proceed would be to unplug the cord, roll it back up and get another, not damaged one. What I did puzzles me to this day. I was nearing completion anyway and decided to continue a bit longer, now, carefully avoiding the cord. I was thinking about him, how hard this was on Grandma, and I stopped minding where I grabbed the cord. I grabbed straight into the exposed copper. I felt a short, sharp jolt in the palm of my hand and immediately realized what happened. I tried to let go but my hand and arm cramped up. It must have only been a split second, but it felt like I had stood there for 10 minutes. Suddenly the reflexes in my arm kicked in and I threw the cable to the floor. I made my way into the barn to unplug the cord from the wall. It wasn't plugged in. I figured I must have yanked it out of the wall with my, not so ninja reflexes, but quickly realized the angle for me to be able to do that were all wrong. And besides, there was a ton of slack in the cable. I checked in and around the barn, but there was no one on the property. I could see my grandmother through the kitchen window, still working on preparing meals for the tens of people that would come around later. I had never believed in something of a spirit world, an afterlife, souls or energy staying behind in the physical world, any of that. But as silly as it sounds, on that day I did. On that day, I was convinced my grandfather was watching my back to make sure I wasn't doing anything stupid. Alright, so it turned out to be quite long. And I'm sure this will be buried, as opposed to my grandfather, wrapped in cloth and cremated on nothing but woodboard, his choosing, but it felt good to write this out. This is not paranormal, but was immensely creepy at the time. I was visiting my hometown and decided to pick up my old high school friend from his house and take him to dinner and a drink to catch up. He is kinda stressed and tells me that his ex, with whom he had broken up with over 2 years prior, has been stalking him and harassing him. I drive him home afterwards, and it starts to drizzle. As I drop him off at his house, the neighborhood was dark and quiet by now. We both notice a bag tied to my side view mirror. It was likely attached when we were at the restaurant. There was a brief letter, obviously written from his ex, that said, "I buried our first love letter under this tree years ago. This tree is growing from our love." I made sure my friend got into his house all right and got the heck out of there. Posted this before. We rented a house that never felt like home. You always felt creeped out walking in there like you were being watched. My BF and our roommate both worked nights, so I would be there by myself a lot. One night I was doing my usual stuff and watching some TV before bed. I had this overwhelming feeling all night that I should avoid the hallway and not look directly down it. It was creepy. I left the hallway lights on and went to bed. Just as I turned to the side table light, I heard a drawer being pulled out and hitting the stopper. I turned on the light and nothing was out of place. This went on about 6 times before I decided I was sleeping with the light on. He comes rolling in about 3 a.m. He's laughing at me for being such a piece. He gets into bed and turned the light off, and that's when all hell broke loose. All the doors down the hallway slammed shut one by one, then our closet doors started rattling. The BF joined me under the covers and we were both terrified. After it stopped, it took 5 to 10 minutes to convince him to go check around the house. Nothing was out of place and our roommate had drove 3 hours back home that night to be with his family, so we knew it wasn't him. I still can't drive by that house without being creeped out. Although nobody believes me, I know what I saw. And it wasn't a stealth bomber. I was about 14, and at about 10:30 I was in bed trying to fall asleep on a school night. I started to hear a hum that quickly began growing in intensity, as whatever was making it got closer. So I bent the blinds on the window behind me and peered out. If you made it to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe and share, and we will see you in the next video.